This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Care Notes with Doug Wilber. And before we get started today, I just want everyone to know that New Cleveland Radio has been working in conjunction with Cleveland 13, and we will be doing more with even this podcast, getting it out to more people in the area. And we are now up for an award for one of our podcasts. So go to Scene Magazine and vote for us. But in the meantime, we are going to continue our series here at Care Notes. And we started this about almost 2 months ago, I think, sometime in March. And today we're calling it the Money Trail. And I know when we hear the word money, our ears perk up. We want to know, does it mean that we get money or we're spending money?
When it comes to care, you're spending money.
Okay, all right. Feeling.
Well, the series is The Last Institution. We've talked about in other episodes, very specific things. So in our first episode, we explored a pretty difficult question, and that's why has the nursing home become one of the last major institutions surviving in American life. And then in the second episode, we really took more of an emotional look, and we looked at the difference between living at home and living at a facility, and tried to contrast that. Today, I want to follow the money, because so often, whenever you see that a system survives for decades, even when people complain about it, when they criticize it, when they say it should change, there's usually a reason, and often that reason is financial. And it's this isn't about attacking nursing homes. And throughout this whole process, I've tried very carefully to not do that, because I'm all about choices and things, but it's also not about specifically blaming healthcare providers. It's really understanding something. And what I'm trying to understand is, and help us understand, is why millions of Americans end up receiving care in settings that they never wanted to be in the first place. Because if we're going to understand the future of aging, we have to understand how we got where we are now.
Okay.
When families first enter the healthcare system, what do you think they assume determines where care will be provided?
Oh, their ability of their parent. So, and we just sort of went through this with my older brother in California. They wanted to consider him totally incompetent because he keeps falling. And it's like, well, can we figure out why I'm falling? As it turns out, he's moving back to Michigan. He's already been assessed, and he's been falling because of a problem with the medication. So they're in the process of changing that. So if he had stayed in California, he was going to end up in basically like a Medicare or Medicaid facility. And he was very, very unhappy because his brain is working and his hands work and everything else. It's like, just don't know why I keep falling down. Now that he knows, it has changed him 100%. I mean, I hear it on the phone now. So he's actually going to be moving into an apartment in Michigan. Now it is a senior apartment, but it's going to be an apartment, and it's going to be his house, and he can choose, to go to the grocery store and make his meals, things like that. So the difference in him in just the last 30 days is remarkable. So
that's great. Yeah.
I'm really on this bandwagon that if you are capable, then you need to be looking at, you know, aging where you are.
Yeah, most people, when asked a question like that, assume that the answer is simple. They believe the system starts with, I think, one big question, and that's what does the patient want? And you're kind of hinting around that in the fact that he seems to be happy because he's going to be able to be independent and have those things and has some answers that are a part of that. But unfortunately, very often the first question is something else entirely. It's what will pay for it,
Yep.
who's going to pay for it, and that's where really we probably need to start today's story. The kind of the first segment that I want to talk about is the promise almost everyone makes as older Americans. People, if you were to ask older Americans, excuse me, a simple question, and that question would be, if your health declines and you need help, where would you want to receive that care? And the overwhelming majority will answer the same way. It's going to be what?
At home.
Exactly. Not in a facility, not down a long hallway, not in a room that looks like every other room.
Right.
Home and their chair, their kitchen, their neighborhood, their memories, their routines, their life. It's one of the most consistent findings in aging research. People are going to say home over and over and over again, and it makes sense because people want to remain where life feels familiar. Um, they they want to remain where they have a sense of control, and you hinted at that sense of control
Right.
with your brother. And yet every year hundreds of thousands of Americans leave their homes and enter institutional settings. The question is really ultimately why? Because wanting something and paying for something are two very different things. And that is probably the why for so many people. There are other whys, but that's a big one. I've talked before about one of the whys being um, how people, family members especially, feel like they can offload responsibility. If I hand it to a facility, I don't have to worry about mom or dad or others in their life, and that's not true. But going to the money part, it that becomes a big part for a lot of people because Medicaid will pay for some institutional care in certain instances, and many times people end up having to go that direction. But if I were to ask you, why do you think so many families are shocked when they first start navigating long-term care options? And you've probably been through it slightly with this situation, right?
I don't think most people have an idea what a long-term facility really is. We see all these fancy places opening up all around in our neighborhoods. Um, in fact, there's one that's opening up almost across the street from me, and they're having, a big shindig this weekend, inviting the public to come in. Um, and it's going to be beautiful. I know it is because I've been in there previously, but it's not home. Okay, it is still, and it's not senior. Even though you're seniors there, it's not senior living like what my brother is moving to.
Right, yeah.
And as an adult child, sometimes we believe if we don't see our parent daily, oh, mom or dad needs that help. They don't remember their car keys. They're getting lost in the parking lot with their car. So they make excuses for themselves to make it okay to have mom or dad move into a facility. And some of them are great, and some of them, people are very, very happy there. But the reality of it is, if you're going into one where you're dependent on Medicaid to pay for it, you're probably not getting that fancy one that's being built across the street.
Right, yeah.
And
Or you're spending down all your money
right.
In that facility until you kick into the handful of Medicaid beds
Yeah,
that they have.
exactly.
Yeah.
And most of us don't understand what it means to pay down for Medicaid and what do you get on Medicaid. If we all got that perfect living situation that we're in now, I would say, hey, there's something wrong with that, but we're not. Okay.
Right.
So that's where the education needs to come about. And I also understand as an adult, do you want to be responsible 24/7 for your parent? That's a hard choice to make too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And that's why um, every family discussion is going to look a little bit different. Um, one of the things, though, I think most families discover very quickly is that healthcare financing is pretty complicated. They discover there's a difference between what is medically possible and what is financially supported, and that kind of discovery and those differences often shape life-changing decisions. The one of the things that if you can imagine two people, both are 84 years old, both need help bathing, both need help dressing, both need help with preparing meals, both have mild dementia, both want to stay at home, but one moves into a facility, the other receives support at home. Most people assume institutional care costs more. And generally speaking, they are absolutely right. It is going to cost more. Yet, and this is the yet, historically, our healthcare system has often made institutional care so much easier to access than comprehensive home-based care.
Right.
And if you think about that, even for a moment, the setting that typically people are going to prefer has often been much harder to ultimately obtain. And you have to say, how the heck did that happen? And the answer is simply there's a history that is involved in this. Our long-term care system was designed for a different America.
Right.
People live shorter lives. Oftentimes, when they went into a facility, it was at the very end of their life. They weren't lingering in the facility. They were just going there when it became impossible in people's mind for them to be cared for. Families were larger at the time, where women were less likely to work outside the home. Medical technology was vastly different than it is today. The expectation ended up being that institution could solve many of institutional needs in general, but long-term care challenges in particular. And for decades, that's exactly what happened. But I think the bigger picture that also we need to understand is that it was typically very much the end of life. And I'll tell you something that's happened. You had long-term care facilities um, and skilled nursing that were created. And then they made assisted living because it was kind of going to be the stepping behind that. And so what you started seeing is people didn't want what was going on in the other, and it was also very expensive. So they started moving people that used to be in the long-term care facilities, start ending up in the assisted living
Right.
facilities. So even in in the years prior to me starting the company, and then in the years since, assisted living then became where people that used to be in the other largely were trying to stay and land in there. So it changed, it shifted. And then you had independent living, which is probably more along the lines of where your brother's at.
Right.
Oftentimes they will have meals and other things. And um, and I don't know if they do in his case, but sometimes you can buy a meal plan, you can
Right.
eat together kind of in a dining room style. Now, what we're finding is a lot of the people that used to be in assisted living are now in this other setting.
Right.
And so, because, frankly, I think people are trying to migrate towards home as best as they can. And it just has messed up the system. It's strange because, and part of it is affordability. Part of it is not only affordability, but how how much control can I try to keep or have in this? So you have much higher acuity patients ending up in places that they weren't in before. And again, I think it's because we're trying to institutionalize people, but trying not to institutionalize people. That
I see
you
what you're
give
saying.
them,
Yes. Yes.
but it's largely consumer based. It's not the facilities that are doing that. It's largely, in my view, um, that the individuals or their families that are trying to grasp a little bit of what they want, which is, I think, ultimately they want home.
Right.
It, so anyway, one of the things that you have to understand is the world has changed. The systems tend to change very slowly, and and much more slowly than the people that they serve, which is why I was saying that a lot of this movement that's happened has been, consumer driven, or the individual driving it, and that's why we're seeing these these changes even within the kind of institutional settings. Um, one of the things that when people talk about long-term care, they're usually talking about um, dollars. That's often, but what does it actually cost, and who pays, and how much? But those things are really important factors in all of this. But there are other costs as well, and that's there's the cost of independence or losing independence, and the cost of losing things that are familiar, and cost of leaving a neighborhood you've lived in for 40 years, or the cost of separation from family, the cost of loneliness, the cost of losing a sense of control, which I was talking about before. These are things that don't end up on a balance sheet.
Oh,
Uh,
in
the families experience this every day, but it's not highly measurable. It's what a daughter sees when they notice their father starts becoming quieter, or spouse notices that their beloved is laughing far less, or a grandchild notices that grandma just doesn't quite seem like herself
right.
anymore. And those are the unquantifiable. Those are
Well,
the
in I learned
things that
I learned through my brother, so his wife has early stage dementia.
Yeah.
And he has, diabetes, so he's got issues from that. In California, if they did not go to um, a senior living, they could not go into a facility together because she she would be considered for memory care. He would not. They would have had to have been separated,
Yeah.
and the cost would have been double because they would have to pay for her in one end, him someplace else. And he didn't. They didn't want to be separated. Number one,
Yeah.
and she needs more activity really for her brain, and so both my brother and his wife were smart enough to know this this is not what we want.
That's
Uh,
not the path.
right. And
Yeah.
luckily, between her side of the family and my brother's side of the family, we just got on board and we started coming up with different things that could be done. Now, my brother lives in California, has lived there for 40 years, did not want to come back to Michigan, but realized he didn't want to give up his independence. So leaving California was more important to him than giving up his independence. But now understanding how facilities look at things, I think that's another piece of education that we need, because my first reaction when my brother was looking was, well, maybe you could find someplace out in California. And they did the research and I followed up, and I was shocked, just did not think that they would want to separate them, but they said facilities have to.
And my guess, if you can, um, California, and we can. It's easy to pick on California because it's paradise, but the fact is California has a lot of weird laws and
Okay.
regulations and other things. And if you see that you can do something in one state and you can't do it in another state, um, and something that would obviously be something that someone would want to do, you could probably look at the government as being responsible for it. And I don't know that for a fact,
Oh, I'm
but
sure that is it there. Yeah.
someone had a good idea, or there's something that will pay paid for one way and not another, and it's unfortunately, you know, it's the way of central planning,
Yeah.
whatever that central planning is, and it's going to happen, and you're going to see bizarre things, and that sometimes happen. In this case, the problem with, and I'm going to get on my high horse a little bit. The problem with having things that are more central planned is you solve one problem and you create another one, and that's probably what has gone on there. And the other problem that I think oftentimes happens is, that it's really hard to change something that has been set in stone or become institutionalized in one way or another. Um, and um, and and so we have to some way somehow, and this isn't in any way a political statement as much as it's what needs to be done, whether you're right or left. We just have to have a responsive government. We have to say, what's the problem? How do we help fix it? And what's the best way? And where do we need to step away? And where do we need to be involved? And one way or another, we have to have a people first type of a view, you know. So, um, anyway, I think, um, that, as I mentioned before, with what we had asked, that those things that someone misses are really not easily quantifiable. But I will say, you know, that from your statement, your brother was trying to preserve those things
Yes,
that those that environment, and the environment would be with his wife or whatever that he's had and known for decades. And I think that's really what he was after, is keeping in place the things that he could keep in place.
exactly.
Am I right with that understanding?
You're right, because it's funny. They got married 15 years ago, and she brought all of her stuff from a 4-bedroom house into a 2-bedroom condo. So they've been living with more stuff than they need.
Yeah.
And so they had the help of somebody coming in and packing up their stuff. And at first, my brother said, "Oh, it's so sad because I can't take," and he was listing at things. And I said, "When was the last time you even looked at those?" And he goes, "You're right. I don't need them." And he realized he's taking what's important to him. His wife is taking what's important for her. They
Right.
still have plenty of things, but the importance really is how they live. They didn't want to be dictated to at this point. And even when the family got involved, they kept saying, "This is our decision." And
Right.
it was the only decision the family made, because not all of us, we couldn't bring him to Michigan to look at the apartment. Um, we did the research. His daughters went and looked at it and knew that dad and stepmom would like it and made the choice. But other than that, he and his wife have been making their choices, and they're more alert now than they were 30, 60, 90 days ago. So that's important to know.
Yeah, it almost always something important gets left behind, and to some degree. But what you want is the most important things to not.
Right.
And it sounds like that's what they were doing, is saying, oh, with all these things, we probably want to take everything. But the fact is that we have to make, we have to answer what's important. And
Right.
I mean, what truly is important. And I think for them, it sounds like being together was really ultimately
Absolutely.
the most
Yep.
important.
Yep.
So, well, if you just look at economics, one of the most important lesson in economics is this: that every system responds to incentives, and healthcare is no different. It's if a particular service receives really strong financial support, that service tends to what? Grow, right? And I can give you 100 examples of that. And if another service uh, faces some sort of barriers or obstacles, growth will slow. And that is just the economics. It's simply how the system behaves. And the challenge comes when incentives and preferences stop aligning, which is what I was um, alluding to before. Um, but if you look, Americans increasingly want flexibility. One of the things I learned at Procter and Gamble is we were doing market segmentation, understanding healthcare consumers
Okay.
in the healthcare system from different perspectives. Um, and what I mean by that is the war generation had different expectations than the baby boomers.
Okay.
Baby boomers were much more wanting to participate in their health care. The war generation, tell me what to do, I'll do it. And that's not an absolute thing, but there was a much higher consumer orientation and with among baby boomers, and we'll see differences in Generation X YZ, and well, the other alphabet. But the truth is that every generation will have different preferences, and 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 I know one of the things that the baby boom generation does want is they want that flexibility, and they want options, and they want independence. They
Yep.
really want independence, and they want care delivered in the least restrictive setting that's possible. And let's face it, that you best is represented for most people at home. And if I were to ask you a question, and because you've been kind of maneuvering through this thing, if you could redesign long-term care from scratch today, knowing what we know now, do you think we'd build the exact same system?
No, do not. Um, I think there's a place for true skilled nursing.
Yeah,
Okay. Get to a point where you can't stay in the hospital. There's no need to be in the hospital, but you need that 24/7 care of some sort. So I believe those facilities are absolutely needed, and we need well-trained people in those facilities. Um, but I think senior living is more important. Senior apartment living, or senior communities of some sort. But also being able to get that additional support, like what home care offers. And right now, that's totally out of pocket, except I understand in a few states, um, there are some Medicare dollars. I don't understand what states that is, but I understand that that is a possibility, so that your family member either can stay home and take care of you, um, or whatever. But we want to be independent. And I don't think there's any reason to make us dependent unless there is a serious illness reason that is stopping us from living life.
yeah. Um, yeah, I think that like you answered, we would change the system. We would design it in a different way, and I think ultimately that's why having this conversation is important, and it needs to spread. It needs to be that lots of people are having this discussion, because we do need to think through and reshape things, and frankly, and choice is important. So somehow we have to build in the system, um, more choices, more ways for people to get that. And because I will say that it's not that home care is just for the wealthy, because it really isn't. Um, that I find a lot of people um, ultimately save money by having it, but they are spending money. That they'll save money, but it's over the alternative. And but it's also giving them what you want, or I mean what they want. But some people, that's not even really an option. They don't have anything, and
Right.
so and we have to kind of think through, um, you know, by giving a little bit of care and doing it right and reimbursing it right, so that you get good people that are doing the care, not bad people. And we hope that we can um you know and create a different environment, and but we have to do that by engaging society in general, because people, I will tell you that, and I believe that there's two parts to this. We have a really good reputation So people know about us, and for that reason they come to us. But I can say that I am now seeing the baby boomers hit the kind of that the needs for what we are doing, and it is starting to feel overwhelming because the need is so high, um, and um, and so we probably should have this discussion before it becomes a crisis, and it could fast become a crisis. I'm warning people. It could fast become a crisis because of a whole bunch of things, not least of which we don't have enough workers right now for the facilities, for the home, for others to be able to take care of the number of people that are going to be needing care in the next 20 years. And uh, there is not one simple answer for that, but we have to start at least asking the questions of what do we need to do to get the people in place. Um, One thing I will say though is that something remarkable is happening, and I believe that we are seeing the future of aging quietly being built. It's not, yeah, I said over the next 20 years, but it's actually happening today where we're beginning to get more solutions. And this is largely being innovated, I believe, from the private sector. You have um, things like what we're doing, which is home-based care, is expanding, and it's expanding at an incredible rate. Technology is improving, and so things like life alerts and other things are coming at the right time, and there are many other technologies that are also coupling with that, like remote monitoring. Telehealth is happening so that it becomes easier for someone to be at home and get online with their doctor or have home visits from doctors or nurse practitioners. Care coordination is improving. Families are at this point in time demanding more choices, and we're seeing the market develop um, for those choices. Um, there are some healthcare organizations that are experimenting with entirely new ways of delivering care. And so there is some momentum. There is something that is going on. I love going to our national meetings because one of the things I'm looking at is the things like the technology. What is being developed? How can we utilize some of these things? And it's the the drive is not politics. It's not our politicians that are coming up with the wonderful answers, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, it depends on, you know, how bad they could mess something up. So, but it is being driven by demographics. The baby boomers are hitting. And, I knew this when I started the company. I never realized, even though I could conceptually um, uh, uh, you know, think about it. I didn't realize um, emotionally what that was going to mean, and because what we see as America is aging.
I will
And
say
go
one
ahead.
one of the things that I'm seeing, and especially since I lost my husband, is how many widows and widowers, okay,
Oh
we're,
yeah,
we're living by ourselves. We're very happy living by ourselves at this point. It's not like we want to go into a facility, but we know there are certain things that we may need assistance with, okay? I have to go have an eye procedure in August, and I was told, well, we really don't like you to take Uber, but you could, but you really should have somebody bring you. Well, I don't have family here. And yeah, I could ask my sons to take time off, come in. And luckily, I did reach out to a couple friends. So I'm going to be okay. But not everybody has a friend or neighbor who's able to do that. And so these are different things that we're all going to start to need. Um, I I had a migraine last week for 3 days, and I could barely make myself anything to eat. Um, you know, it would have been nice if I would have had that number of somebody to call and say, "Hey, I need you for a couple of hours today." Just obviously never thought about that. But those are things that we are all thinking about now. And it's important that we start planning. And luckily, when I went over a few of these things with my boys last week, it was like, okay, mom, you know, do you need us now? And it's like, no, 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 no. I'm okay, but I'm going to be proactive and I'm going to let you know when I need something because
Right.
I I don't want to be one of many sitting in a room someplace um, that doesn't feel like home.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's so often we get calls. I had a call just yesterday, and essentially it was someone needed to go out of town and wanted someone just to stop in and visit his wife who has some issues. It just not to do a whole lot, but just to make sure
There's
the
a
eyes are on
yeah,
that person without there being a whole lot even for someone to do. What will that do? Well, for that person going out of town, they can then relax. Someone's stopping in. They're going to make sure, that things seem normal. And at some point in time, it's things like that. It's not many days. It's just
yep,
literally a handful of days, but that peace of mind makes a difference. We
exactly.
oftentimes get called from places like the Cleveland Clinic, will oftentimes send people our way. People are coming in from out of town. They don't have anyone here. And, then we'll end up, if we can, we'll help those individuals because they need someone to do exactly what you said. They need to get from the hotel over to the facility.
Right,
I mean, the Cleveland Clinic facility, and then they need to get back to the hotel, but they need some eyes on them during that time,
right,
and they have no one for that, and yet they're coming in from out of town because of that need. You know, but there just is a need for those type of things to
right.
start being built in, so that whether it be us or others, and that need that. And what we do is, if we can, we'll help someone out. It's not to make money; it's to follow our mission, which is to help people. So the, the I guess that when we look at the next 10 or 20 years, I I'm wondering what changes do you think that families are going to expect? Are you expecting a, you know a as far as the healthcare system, and that question, we don't necessarily need to answer now, but I think it's the question we need to ruminate as is, like, what is it going to look like? This is the pig and the python, as they called it. This is when things are going to be stretched because of the number of people that are aging. And what I really hope is that someone that we see this in the context that needs to be seen. Um, and I'll tell you a personal concern. Care is costly, and what I don't want is someone to see um, uh, people as they're aging as being expendable.
Right.
Uh, and um, And I think to some degree, putting someone in a facility is a reflection of that. I think there are other things that are even more insidious that could come down the path, because if you can, to some degree, expedite someone's death, I think it costs the system less, and so there's incentive to do that. And I think that's really, I'll call it what I believe it is. I think it's evil, um, and um, and so we have to start with the belief that we love and respect our elders, and that we venerate those that are aging for the things that they bring to the table. And you can see what it is, and uh, um, you know, uh, things like grandparents are important. They're not unimportant, and great great grandparents are even more important in some ways, because they show us, our history in a way that is a living history. Um, but I think the future isn't going to be built around buildings, and it's not going to be built around institutions for sure. It's going to be built around people. And so we have to have a people-centered view of our care. And I think one of those things is making sure we give people meaningful choices about how and where they age, and centered on where they want to age in the first place.
Absolutely.
As we're making those decisions. So, in closing, I think the future of aging really isn't ultimately going to be about nursing homes. Um, it isn't about policy. It isn't even ultimately about home care. It's about dignity. It's about autonomy. It's about preserving the things that really make life meaningful. And for millions of Americans, those things are most often found at home. I'll say that part, but I think that we have to have our hearts and our policy and our design truly be people centered. So.
Absolutely. I think that is the way to go. And I'm hoping that anyone who's listening to this, if you have ideas, please let us know. Reach out to either myself or Doug. Our information is in the show notes, so you can reach us. Um, if you'd like to be a guest and share your viewpoint, we certainly would like that as well, because we obviously don't have all the answers. And maybe there is somebody out there who has a really great answer for the future. Wonderful.
Sounds good. Well, I'm Doug Wilber, and
Yep.
thanks for listening. So,
Thank you. Talk to you next month. Bye bye
all
now.
right. Bye bye.